Okay, so James Stirling, 1926, 1992. He died at 66, and he was born on April 22nd. I actually panicked a little bit today because I wanted to double check. Sometimes I make the mistake because I mingle the date of birth. I mean, I pay homage to people who died both on the day of birth and on the day when one died. But there is another James Stirling who died on April 22nd on Wikipedia, and the first thing I saw was that Stirling, but it's not this one. This one, James Stirling, the architect, was born indeed on April 22nd. Is called. I asked myself actually, but I'm not sure this question is legitimate. When I prepare this material, I ask myself, is he the Francis Bacon of British architecture? Um, Actually, I'm not sure if the question is mine. I made this presentation 2 or 3 years ago, or somebody else asked this question, but I doubt it, and I'm not. I don't think he can be described as the Francis Bacon of British architecture. Francis Bacon being the painter, the celebrated, the well-known British painter. Anyway, this was the man. And I understood he was a non-conformist. That public gatherings he would have a persona that would intrigue, not to speak differently. Anyway, he was a brilliant architect until he met Michael Wilford, but we'll arrive there. Some drawings, not too many. Um, so he was an architect who worked at the beginning exclusively in a modernistic way, if I can use these words. There was no ambiguity there at the beginning, but after 1970 something, 72 I guess or so, when he became a partner of Michael Wilford, his architecture changed. He described himself in the lecture that I attended that he became more sophisticated, but I actually think that so-called sophistication was a loss. These are studies for a project, I think the one in Stuttgart, which you are going to see. Um, this was James Gowan was his first partner. And I think this period, this from 1956 to 1963, was a very important one for James Stirling, as it was for James Gowan. And I think they did some excellent works at this time. Here they are, with James Stirling smilingly drafting and James Gowan talking on the phone in a space rather narrow. If you compare, what architects have these days, those who are successful. Here they seem to work almost in the living room, if not the bedroom of an apartment. But that's how architecture was done often, and sometimes excellent architecture. Flats at Ham Common, this he did with James Gowan in 1958. Uh, I like these works. They still are freshly modern. There was a belief in the commonness of man in a way. This was not an elitist architecture, and I like this fact that the social concerns of architects serving those concerns through often public housing. Now, some might say that this kind of work is not exceptional, that is not very, very different architecture or whatever. But there is an integrity here and even a dignity, I would say. You know, it's a work, it's an honest work. And while honesty might not be enough in architecture, is very important. And you know, because we have too much theatricality, especially these days, or until the pandemic. So this was late 50s. And then the following years in the 60s, they continued to do work which was similar to what you see here. I am tempted to think that actually a return to the social concerns of the early works of modernity, although this was not so early in the 50s, but we can go even further back at the beginning of the 20th century, and we can see that you know, architects were not just artists, but sometimes, and not just a few times, they were also social workers, so to speak, concerned about ethical matters, not just aesthetical. Something that doesn't quite happen now, you know, or until the pandemic. I don't know what will happen in the following years, but you know, the stars of the uh, you know, of the early 21st century and the end of the 20th century were not so concerned with social issues actually, and this I think is a loss. While these architects, James Stirling and James Cowan, as you can see, that's how they began with projects done for social housing and not expensive apartment buildings actually. Louis Kahn did the same thing in the United States. He started with projects that addressed the need for affordable housing and so on. You can do a good architecture even without high ambitions in the aesthetical field. And I think the satisfaction I mean, that derives from the fact that you used a budget that was perhaps not very opulent for to serve a community which was not a community of stars, but of so-called common men, common human beings, if there is such a thing. Uh, I think the satisfaction that came with doing such a work was not little. Creativity can manifest itself at all levels. And so any opportunity to build should be taken as seriously and as sensitively as possible. These exterior corridors are, uh, you know, used in England much more often than they are used in Romania. And even the staircases, as you can see, they have a lot of natural light. So there is the level of enclosure is not as high as it is in our country. The details are, you know, rather robust, so to speak. Yes, indeed, there isn't so-called a lot of so-called sophistication, but for such a program, an excessive so-called sophistication might have been actually a deficiency and not a quality. Although there are things here that show, study these portions of the building are not just, you know, they didn't arrive at where they are without, you know, study. It's obvious. Study and talent. 1959, the Faculty of Engineering, this is an important work for Leicester University. It's a work that is still very fresh, in my opinion. You know, this belief in the conjunction between, I mean, this is an engineering school, and maybe even more appropriately, the architectural language is you know, is not, it doesn't have that, you know, sweetness which other kinds of programs might accept. In this case, we are dealing with a school of engineering, and the building expresses somehow that force that genuine engineering has, and the honesty. The honesty, usually, in my opinion, engineers have to be honest. You cannot indulge in you know, avoiding truth when you do engineering. You have to be an honest person, and the work has to be honest. And this building has a level of honesty also, despite the fact that it is rather, you know, moderately dramatic, but its rhetorics are not, you know, I would say misleading. It's a fine building. It's still a fine building. And being honest doesn't mean that it cannot be sculptural. It is sculptural. But it has this freshness of the industrial model. You know, it's something industrial about it, yet it is about education, and education shouldn't be conformist. It is not conformist. It is not a conformist building, and I think good education is inevitably connected with creativity, and that's what we see in this building. It's a creative building. At the first look, you might not say that this is a, you know, a place for such an institution, for a school, but looking more carefully, you can see that it's not an industrial building either. It's somehow in between, and this makes it interesting, I think. There was a reason why James Stirling received the Pritzker Prize. You know, he stood out through his buildings. Look, this is a building that is has variety, has unity, has geometry, has sculpturalness, and it is probably inspiring to study in such a building. Everything is controlled, but the level of expressive freedom is still high, and this shows the skill of the architects. You know, it would have been very easy to create a building that is controlled and ordered, but unengaging, no surprise. But here there are surprises at the level of aesthetics. It is fresh. It still is, you know, although more than 60 years passed since it was built. Another project from 1961, Camberwell School Assembly Hall, a little different than the previous building, maybe a little more subdued somehow, the rather sloping plains, but still the building is a building that belongs to Stirling and James Gowan. A building doesn't have to be big in order to have a certain significance. It can be actually very small, like Le Cabanon by Le Corbusier, which is only 16 square meters. But in my opinion, and I know I could be I'm controversial in what I say, but for me, Le Cabanon is more important than Villa Savoie. I see the ideality of the square here, and you see the four axes with a little bit of twisting like I shouldn't mention the swastika, but you see how the four entrances are. They are not like that famous building by Palladio, La Rotonda. No, but still it's the ideality of the square, and then you have the four entrances, which are in reverse, those opposite to each other. Otherwise, the section is contradicting somehow the plan. You are not expecting that elevation or that section looking at the plan. Another building from 1964 at St. Andrews University. I think this is a dormitory, a hall of residence, yes. What I like about these buildings from the early years of James Stirling is that the buildings also have something of the accuracy, the rigor, and of some mechanism. They are buildings, but they also have intricacies that one might see in certain mechanisms, and they function well. I mean, there is a precision here at work, and yet the sensitivity that comes with what an architect, I guess, is supposed to do. There is a serialism here, not surrealism, not S-U-R, but S-E-R. I don't know if there is such a word. This, the rhythmicity, the rhythm of these rooms that are also using the diagonal, and the windows are placed on both sides of these triangularities that animate the facade. There is a playfulness, a geometrical playfulness, which is, enticing. And if it is not carried to too much length, like actually it is here. But all in all, I think the architecture of James Stirling in this period it has a controlled playfulness. I come back to the word controlled, because yes, it is not a playfulness which is going beyond certain limits. For my personal taste, if I'm not saying that it matters, my personal taste, but in my opinion, this is a little bit too long, and it might even be that in certain countries, there might have been some restrictions in this sense, but I don't know. Anyway, I don't know exactly what this guy, only now I contemplate this slide, what does it mean, negative significance, neutral significance, and so on. I don't see any outstanding significance here. Um, but if I look at the cardinal point and I see the orientation of these rooms, it seems that these rooms are actually facing, kind of north, uh, which for a dorm is, I would say, problematic because there isn't much sun that enters these rooms. These are fine, they are all facing south, but these, anyway, here I am, some kind of a functionalist. Although I wish the functionalists would take into consideration the cardinal points. But maybe I didn't look carefully, but maybe these windows which are placed at a 45 degrees angle, or I don't know if it's 45, but at an angle, maybe through these deviations from the line of the facade, maybe they follow somehow the trajectory of the sun. It's possible. So they receive some light, some sunlight. Cambridge University, the Faculty of History, as you can see, he worked a lot for universities, for educational programs. 1968, the turbulent 1968. And the building by Stirling and Gowan probably had, it wasn't really turbulent, but with its freshness, a vision, I think, could be associated in a way for that revolutionary longings of the students in that year, and the neighboring years. Personally, I think that would be nice if we would have again something of those years now. There was a freshness in the way the young, wanted to change the world, so to speak. They fought against the war. They fought against the obsession, the mercantile obsessions, and there was something nice, I think, at the end of the 60s, even in music, and also music coming from Great Britain. There was a sense of change. And I think that sense of change was connected with the social concerns. It was not so much about individualism, it was more about communal longings and desires. And something like this, I think, is needed again. I mean, talking about communality, even here, what do we see? We see this big space, which is exactly about that. It's about people coming together. Now, I know that in the pandemic, we need to arrive at social distancing. So there are tensions, there are contradictions, but in conditions of normality, I think to express in architecture a desire for togetherness is a legitimate one. But like in the previous work, I would say that here again, there is I don't know if I perceive correctly, I am myself subjective, but I see that at times he creates this lengthy rhythm that is perhaps a little bit too lengthy in the sense that there are no interruptions that maybe would have added something to the aesthetics of the building. Otherwise, if you look at the plans and the sections, they are brilliant. I love these sections, you know. And again, this is the space of communality. This is the space of togetherness, and is done very, very well, both in plan and in sections. On the other hand, these large surfaces of glass, they inevitably create problems in the winter as well as in the summer. So maybe now would be the time to, it was then too, but now maybe even more to think seriously about using so much glass. You know, if we are serious about sustainability, about ecology, about the climate change, about the need to rely less on extensive air conditioning and other mechanisms to compensate the loss of energy that comes with using so much glass. But then, you know, at the end, you know, in the 60s, there wasn't, although it could have been, it was known, but, you know, the concerns were not so high as they should be these days. They should have been then too, but, you know, it was a certain optimism in the air, you know, and glass promises a lot through its transparency. That's why I think it was legitimate for Andrea Kahn to talk about the demagogy of glass, because glass does promise a lot. And in my opinion, it delivers less than what it promises. Under the banner of total transparency, actually, there is a promotion for even a certain level of either blindness or hypocrisy, because you know the glass does offer transparency, but transparency is not everything. Just the fact that you can see through a wall doesn't mean that you have access to embrace, so to speak, what is outside of the wall, which is made of glass. So it's only in a way, to an extent, an illusion. And I remember when I was a child and I visited my grandparents in a village near my hometown, and they had very small windows, traditional house with very, very small windows. Now, someone today might say that small window was an impediment in relating adequately with nature, with what was outside. But from my experience and my memory, it was not like that at all, because the dialogue with the outside was about quality, it was not about quantity. And in fact, sometimes, the small, I mean, the window was small, but because of it, what I perceived through that window was even more precious. When you have a whole wall or even a whole roof made of glass, there are no nuances. It's just this totality, which is, as I said, actually misleading, because it's only at the level of the eye. Of what you see is not what you actually get. It's all about visual connectedness, but connectedness should go beyond the visual. Jean Nouvel said that complete transparency is obscene. although he used it, now the word obscene is used with that chic French attitude towards other things as well. But what he meant, I think, in part is correct, that nothing should be completely transparent in life, or looking the other way, completely opaque. There should be some interplay. What quality that James Stirling has is that he divides. You see, the glass is fragmented. So there are large pieces of glass. I mean, as a whole is a significant part of the building made of glass. But the glass, the windows themselves are small. So he divides the large pieces of glass into smaller segments, and this creates, I think, there is a sensitivity here at work that many of the so-called late modern buildings do not have, exactly because they don't have this, fragmentation of the glass. Quite the opposite. The tendency was to use larger and larger pieces of glass, without divisions, without mullions, and so on. 1971, the Queen's College, the Flori building, another interesting building. Again, Stirling as a sculptor. The sculpturalness of the building is important. It's not the only quality that the building should have, but it does matter. And what I see now, after, 50 years, half a century passed since this building was built, uh, there is a freshness of vision which still I find admirable. Although this extensive surface of glass unsettles me a little bit, but otherwise there is some kind of dialogue, some dialectical play between opacity and transparency. You have glass, but you also have opaque walls. It's not just glass. I mean, as a whole, it's not a very mysterious architecture, but there is a certain complexity which is controlled, as I mentioned earlier, and the geometry sometimes offers surprises. But all in all, it's not an architecture that invites towards some kind of a high level hybridity, or even looking at it in a negative way, to mystifications. But you see, from the other, it's kind of transparent for the spirit, for the mind, how the functions are honored, or served through these buildings. There is a surprise which comes from the way he or them they articulated the volumes, and this interplay between transparency and opacity creates something dynamic. And again, the power of the diagonals is not to be denied. And color, yes. Color is also something that not always, and not too many modern architects used, but he is not afraid of the color, as you can see. And color comes mainly from the opaque walls. It doesn't come from the glass. A training center for Olivetti, an extension, 1972. Again, some color. As I said before, the belief in glass was still at its maybe naive level to an extent, but maybe a book could be written, and maybe it was already, because glass is connected as a material with democracy, with progress, and so on. But I continue to think that Andrea Kahn was perhaps right in her choice for what she wrote, the demagogy of glass. Because let us face it, under that glass roofing, you could melt down in the summer and you could freeze in the winter if you didn't have an adequate source of energy to compensate for the misguided, I would say, freedom you get by opening up in this way the building at its superior level, at the roof. We are not plants, we the human beings. And so, under a glass roof, such an extensive glass roof, you might suffer. Southgate social housing, it was demolished. I don't know if I have some pictures. This would be considered or was considered a brutalist work. Brutalism is coming, is at least 2 or 3 years ago, it was revisited, and in positive terms. There was an exhibition in Vienna, in Austria, called SOS Brutalismus. Why? Maybe because brutalism, or what we try to depict through this word, brutalism, was some kind of a reaction to, the fragilities that deconstruction brought in. So the brutalist architecture had was robust, if nothing else, was robust, and maybe as a counterpoint to deconstruction, looking back to brutalism with sympathy, was in order to reground, so to speak, architecture, to bring back to it some kind of a sense of solidity. This is not brutalism, but certain parts are, and a belief in geometry in a certain way, and it is a kind of heroic architecture, which maybe today not everybody would feel comfortable with. In fact, I don't think this kind of heroic architecture that was possible in the 60s, early 70s, is fashionable now, or it was until the pandemic. Maybe we need a different kind of heroic architecture, one that is not a rhetorically heroic, but through implication, in a subtle way, in a discrete way. If you could imagine a heroic architecture that is heroical or heroic in a discrete way. Now we arrive at a building. He already worked with Michael Wilford, with his new partner, and this is a building at the frontier between modernity and post-modernity. I like the building. It has complexity of fragmentation, but it also has parts which are already over the threshold that separate modernism from postmodernism. But it's one of his most important buildings. And sorry about this plan, it's not it's not very easy to read it. Now it's better. Uh, in the text I'm going to read after I finish presenting this visual material, I will make a reference to this building and you will recognize it. Usually when you have this kind of centrality, that it is either an atrium or a central hall or a courtyard. At the center, you place something that is, like in the case of Il Campidoglio in Rome, where Michelangelo placed, I don't know if he himself, but I imagine, yes, it's possible, he was involved in this. At the center is a statue with the Emperor Mark Aurelius. Now here is a drain hole in the center. So what a change, no? From usually in such a configuration at the center, you place something that you value. But here we have the very opposite. We have a drain hole. Now you might say a drain hole is very important. Well, it is, indeed, it is, but still, I still think is an incredible distance between placing at the center a drain hole or the statue of a Roman emperor. I would say that this was an expression of a certain pessimism, if not cynicism, on the part of Stirling. But again, he shows his skill at combining, bringing in a dialectical dance or dialectical relationship, transparency with opacity. And he uses also, you see, curvatures, and he was a skillful architect. So the building is an organism, is an urban organism that is made of fragments that could be read in surprising ways, and they collaborate to the symphonic work of the whole. Although a critic talked even about the cacophony of the work, I don't know if I would use that word for this particular building. Even the colors are, could take one by surprise. No, with pink. I mean, not too many people use pink in in their architectures. Although Frank Lloyd Wright himself used a much lighter and discreet form of pink for the parapets of the falling water, after he attempted to paint them in gold. And it was Mr. Kaufman, the beneficiary, the client, who made Frank Lloyd Wright change his mind, and then he settled for a very, very pale, discreet form of pink. But here, the pink is pink, although, it's not extensively used, but it's still noticeable. The appearance of the columns, of course, we are in the midst of postmodernism, arches and columns, although they are rather burlesque. You see, they are very thick, but very short. What can we say? Personally, I'm saddened by the transformation in the work of James Stirling, and I'm also sad about the way postmodernism assumed history. Here we see, gestures of negation in a way. Look at this slight instability provoked by this piece here. It's a commentary on being unsettled in a way. But there are levels of innovation, of creativity, which are interesting and engaging. I would say that these are subversive elements. Even what is here at the bottom, you see, as if the building was not completed or it was ruined. Some parts fell to the ground, but I think that's how they projected it to be like this. So it's a commentary also on the passage of time, on the inevitability of a building to resist the attack of the elements on it. The, the inevitable disfigurations that the building arrive at in time. Stuttgart. (1984), Cambridge, Massachusetts, Harvard University, Fogg Museum, Sackler Galleries, the extension. Again, postmodernism, but there is a level of metamorphosis here. The historical references are not deadly. So, you know, if you were able to transform through creativity, historical models, it was okay. I used to see this building in a more critical way. Now, less so. So I changed myself. I don't know if for the better or not. But I will mention this building in the text I'm going to read after this. London, 1987, Tate Britain Clore Galleries, the extension. Again, postmodernism. There is a distance now between what we see here and what we saw at the beginning with those works, which didn't have any kind of interest in historical references. But this is 20 years later, 25 years later, and things changed. It was also the influence of Leon Krier on James Stirling. At that time, Leon Krier was very influential, and it affected even resolutely modern architects. 1997, this was completed posthumously to his designs, offices and retail at number 1 Poultry in London. Still effective. So we are in 1997. This is already late for postmodernism. I mean, deconstruction arrived in New York City at the Museum of Modern Art, I think in 1991 or 1992. This is 5 years, at least 5 years later, and still James Stirling is working with elements of what one could legitimately so belonged to postmodernism. It's still an interesting building, and you know, it has variety and it has movement, but historicism, I think, is problematic, was problematic. And I'm not showing here, I think, the embassy he built for Great Britain in Berlin. He built another building in Berlin. He built other buildings which I was hesitant to include in the presentation. I was probably wrong, because if I was an objective, window into the work of James Stirling, I should have shown everything. But I decided for this particular presentation to kind of remain under the influence of his earlier works. This is I mean, it has qualities, but there is some kind of graphic postmodernism here that is, I would say, at least to an extent problematic. The plan is interesting, and you see again the round shape, the circle in the center, and there is something. I mean, the ludic aspects of the building are high, but again, historicism, in my opinion, is problematic. Uh, and it was already late, you know, just 3 years before the end of the century. The plan has qualities. It's clear that that James Stirling had talent and had an ability to create non-monolithic buildings. I mean, there is a level of mono aesthetics here, but still he is able to break the building into parts, into fragments, and thus the building becomes dynamic. Again, this was a building that was finalized after his death. He died in 1992. This was from 1997. Okay, and now if you allow me, so let's wish him happy birthday. And if you allow me, I will read that text I wrote after his lecture at Columbia University. And I apologize both to him and to you for certain things, or not as much for what I say, but for what for how I say it. So I wrote it in April 1992. I was not even aware. Now I reflect on the fact that he was born in April, on the 22nd of April, and he was invited by Bernard Tschumi to lecture at Columbia. So after the lecture which I attended, I wrote this text, and please allow me to read it to you. Apropos should be written differently in English with a P close to the A. Apropos of James Stirling's lecture, April 1992. I am sad that Stirling met Creer. I am sad that Stirling made Harvard University's Sackler Museum. I am sad that Stirling broke his partnership with James Gowan. I am sad that Stirling met Michael Wilford. I am sad that Stirling has to be placed now between Richard Meyer and Robert Stern. I am sad that Stirling became more populist. I am sad that Stirling met Creer. I repeat this like Aldous Huxley did in The Brave New World with the ending is better than mending. I am sad that Stirling became now ironic and bitter. I am sad that Stirling is forced, in between quotation marks, today to use traditional materials in non-traditional ways. I am sad that Stirling built that wedding cake at Cornell University, which I didn't show. I am sad that Stirling is using now classical columns. I am sad that Stirling mocks with his bookshop for the Venice Biennial Ise Shrine in Japan. I am sad that Stirling only mocks with the mushroom capital columns in Stuttgart, Frank Lloyd Wright. I am sad that Stirling found nothing else to place in the center of the central court at the same building above but a drain hole. I am sad that Stirling became lately far more sophisticated. I am sad that Stirling uses now pleasing colors like that pink that I mentioned. I am sad that Stirling became lately a contextualist without truly believing in contexts. I am sad that Stirling broke with his partnership with James Gowan. I repeat this. I am sad that Stirling, sorry about this avalanche of I am sad, but I am trying to make a point. I am sad that Stirling became now more informal. I am sad that Stirling made the Tate Gallery in London. I am sad that Stirling is quoting now from his own previous speeches. I am sad that Stirling met Creer, encore. I am sad that Stirling uses now technological structures above traditional pedestals. I am sad that Stirling uses now a Stadtkrone without an actual crown in Tokyo. I am sad that Stirling became now picturesque. I am sad that Stirling's work today can be read as a bizarre symphony or cacophony. This critic said this, Sarah Chajek, if I pronounce well her name. I am sad that Stirling translates from the square to the circle now without any pendentive, and that a cylinder is crowning now the cubical structure below. I am sad that Stirling didn't meet a noble savage, a vertical invader. Here I'm referring to what Le Corbusier was called as being a noble savage or a vertical invader. I am sad that Stirling met Creer, and just a few months ago, from April to June, in June the same year, 1992, I am sad that Stirling died. Sorry for sorry for this indeed excessive. I was criticizing Stirling for repeating himself sometimes things, and then I myself made the same mistake. But I was trying to make a point, and the point was that he changed dramatically in a way when he assumed historicism, when he assumed postmodernism, and when he became more so-called populist and more pleasing with colors or whatever. I think it was a loss. Personally, I like more his early works where he was not a pleaser, where he didn't use, pink or eccentric forms, where it was that robustness of the engineer in a way, that honesty that attracted me towards his work, and that I saw deteriorated after he began to work using the postmodern influence, and also his collaboration with Michael Wilford, and also being influenced probably at least to an extent by Leon Creer. Now I go to a North American architect who was in a way very different from James Stirling. He's described as being very modest, although he built some very big buildings. But even more so, it is difficult to be modest and build such large buildings as he built. Let's see what we could find out about this architect, who was born also on April 22nd. Edward Larrabee Jones. This was the man. He died at 80 something. He lived longer than James Stirling. So Edward Larrabee Jones was an American architect, as you can see, born on April 22nd in 1915 and died in 2004. Barnes was born in Chicago, Illinois, into a family he described as incense-swinging high Episcopalians. My God, consisting of Cecil Barnes, a lawyer, and Margaret Helen Ayer, recipient of a Pulitzer Prize for the novel Year of Grace. He graduated from Harvard in 1938, so at 23, after studying English and art history before switching to architecture, then taught at his alma mater, Milton Academy, before returning to Harvard for further studies under Walter Gropius and Marcel Breuer, the Europeans who escaped Nazi Germany and who left behind the prestigious school Bauhaus, which ended its life then in 1933, 1934. He graduated from the Harvard Graduate School of Design in 1942, that is Edward Larrabee Barnes, and served in the Navy during World War II. After the war, he worked for Henry Dreyfuss in Los Angeles, designing prototypes for mass-produced homes. In 1949, Barnes founded Edward Larrabee Barnes Associates in Manhattan. During his long career, Barnes, with his wife Mary Barnes, as interior designer, designed office buildings, museums, botanical gardens, private houses, churches, schools, camps, colleges, campus planning, and housing. Quite a list. Many of his buildings are widely recognized, including the Dallas Museum of Art, which you are going to see, the Walker Art Center, which you are going to see, and the IBM building at 590 Madison Avenue in Manhattan, which you are also going to see. And I remember when I was searching for a job, when I lived in New York, I contemplated attempting to work for his office. I didn't apply, but his work had a certain quality that attracted my attention. I didn't expect then that one day I will pay homage to him on his birthday by presenting his work. So in 2007, the AIA, the American Institute of Architects or Architecture Board of Directors voted on December 7th to award posthumously the gold medal to him. And he is remembered for fusing modernism with vernacular architecture and understated design. Now, maybe the so-called vernacular architecture is not so present actually, but his design has could be described as at least sometimes as being understated, and that is actually a quality. The visitor center in the Botanical Garden in Chicago, um, I wouldn't say that this is very understated. I mean, at least the top part is rather phallic, but as I said, not in every work he was truly understated. Although what might be considered understated in the North American culture, in some other cultures might still be considered as being overstated, maybe. And I like this picture though. You have a touch of Alhambra here with the fountains and the building with its imposing symmetry, and then the ineffable clouds above. Old Stone Square. This is I like this building. It's strangely, I thought that it has something almost Japanese about it. I'm also thinking somehow of Fumihiko Maki, the Japanese architect. It works with the cubes, it works with squares. The windows are square, and also the building seems to be made up of a number of squares. But there is something about it, I think. I don't know very well how to explain it. I don't think it's a monotonous building. It is massive, it is monolithic, but the fact that one cube is missing here, this subtraction problematizes. But even if it was complete, I think the proportions are derived from the cube, but it's something about it that I don't dislike. It's an honest building, and again, the fact that he uses, maybe who wrote that text about fusing vernacularity or vernacular architecture with modernity, maybe it had in mind also, how these windows are here. You see, there's even this large section of the wall that is glass. He divided into small squares. Also, these smaller windows here are divided in four. It's almost like archetypal kind of window. So there is some kind of relationship with even with the childhood. If you ask a child to draw a window, probably would draw it like this. New South Building in Princeton, uh, again, a square, the cube, but there is more to it, I feel. It's rigorous, is rigid, but it's also open somehow. I mean, what am I saying somehow? At the bottom is clearly open, but even above, you can read inside the building. You can decipher it. It's not a building that tries to hide anything. And this, I think, is a quality. And you see that there are, if I am to refer to a word which was used in connection with the Stirling, there are sophistication here. Look at this corner, how it is done. This point here and this point here. There are subtle things here that go on. It's not as simplistic as it might appear at first. Now, this is I'm a little bit confused. Either he built first a house and then he added other buildings, or he built a cluster of buildings and now it's called like a village. The Haystack Mountain School of Crafts and Deer Isle in Maine, a village of shingled cottages placed on the National Register of Historic Places. The one who referred to the connection between vernacular architecture and modern architecture probably had mainly these buildings in mind. They are modern, this is not true vernacularity, if there is such a word. It's yes, it uses the sloping roof, but otherwise the volumes are abstract. They are modern, uh, and um, and yet, yes, there is some kind of subtle clin d'oeil towards what might be called vernacular architecture. So now is this school there, and well, I thought initially it was just a house. Maybe a few other buildings were built, and together they form what is called this little village, so-called village. Actually, to attempt to unite the vernacular with the modern, with what is called the vernacular and what is called the modern is I think a positive attempt, and not an easy one, but one that could bring forth interesting fruits. Because in a way, it's uniting the opposites, conjunctio oppositorum. So in the description of his works, when he received the AIA gold medal, I will read a few things about what was said then. Barnes was noted for crisp geometric buildings in both rural and urban landscapes that didn't call attention to themselves, much like the architect himself. And we already saw we saw this building. We are going to see all of them from this list. Uh, yeah, the architect in general is not someone who doesn't call attention to himself or herself, but apparently he had this quality, and it's not a quality to be ignored. Barnes' museum designs seem to reflect his modest personality. In Barnes' own words, we are trying to create architecture that does not compete with art, to put the priorities in the right order. It is flow more than function that concerns us. There must be a sense of going somewhere like a river. At the same time, the architecture must be relatively uneventful and anonymous. Again, how many architects would think like this? I don't think too many. So several people talked about him as supporting his choice of, I mean, his being chosen to receive the gold medal of Harvard. We'll come back of AIA, the gold medal in architecture. We'll come back at some of the evaluations relating to this event. Later, Crown Center in Kansas City, an 85-acre low-rise commercial office complex that handsomely shapes the cityscape. These are not my words. I couldn't find the picture though with that building. Then the building at 590 Madison Avenue in New York City, formerly known as the IBM building, an elegant, nearly triangular tout giant with a bamboo court atrium epicenter. Now, of course, the word giant describes something that is very much noticeable now, and so some of the descriptions of his work match him, others less so. I mean, this is not really a building to claim the status of being, anonymous and unnoticeable, at least for its height. But what can you do? It's Manhattan. You cannot ignore the context. The entrance into the building is not the most unnoticeable entrance into a building either. But again, it's a large office building, and as such, he built another one, another skyscraper at 599 Lexington Avenue, also in New York City, a sharply chiseled showcase of skyscraper angles. Now, again, the word showcase, like the word giant, does not belong truly to the grammar of the unnoticeable. But again, we are dealing with Manhattan, and here it is. I wouldn't say it's the most modest skyscraper in the world, but then can a skyscraper be modest? In itself, by definition, is an immodest building because of the height. To talk about a modest skyscraper is to is to invite controversy. The Walker Art Center in Minneapolis, a helical sequence. I don't know what the word helical means. I almost felt tempted to placing another L there. A helical sequence of galleries known for its quiet, I guess for their quiet, or maybe it refers to the sequence, elegance. I actually like this building. I don't know again what that word means, helical, but I like this building. Again, it's like another building I showed at the beginning. It's robust. I feel it's sincere. It's not trying to mislead, and it's a kind of modern architecture which I think is to be encouraged. Although it is opaque and rather massive, but because he breaks the volumes, I don't think it's overwhelming. And you see, even in the plans and the sections, there are deviations, there are accidents, so to speak. So the building is alive. In fact, in the drawings, it appears to be even more alive than in the views. And the building is not so simplistic. You see even these sections through this wall here, slight deviations from the predictability of the line or the surface here as well in plan. So these slight deviations are important. They bring in nuances when now I see here detail which can be found in Louis Kahn also, this kind of entrance into through the corner of the building into a building which is oriented dramatically in a different way. The Dallas Museum of Art, a limestone composition of geometric forms that, while dominated by an imposing 40-foot high barrel vault, seems to recede before the works within it. Now, of course, if you remove the artwork, the building might appear a little too gray and too plain, but using the building as a background, the artwork seems very welcomed, doesn't it? And so are the large banners. Maybe this conception of architecture as a background is to be contemplated in some cases. To make a building just for this attribute or quality, to be a background and nothing else but a background. Here, the trees use the building as a background and equally successfully. So the prime characters, the main characters in the narrative of the building are actually the parts of the project which are not the building, either artworks or banners or trees. This is a building which is not very clear to me if he did just the 5-story glass atrium or also the building on the left and the right. It's in Washington, D.C. I don't know if he did also these buildings. Maybe yes, maybe not. I hope he didn't, but that's because of my dislike of historicism. But this atrium is certainly his. And despite the fact that he uses an immodestly large surface of glass, has a modernism which we can appreciate. Of course, ignoring the appreciable amount of artificially generated energy which is probably needed in order to be able to use the space without collapsing or freezing in the winter. Again and again, I come back to Andrea Kahn and her essay about the demagogy of glass. This is an art gallery at the Carnegie Institute in Pittsburgh, light filled space respected for its, and S is missing its graciousness. You don't see too much of what that text referred to, but maybe when we look at the pictures, you will. We can see, though, in the plan that he was indeed concerned with the flow. In the case of a museum, he wanted to honor, he mentioned the river, that to have the feeling that you are going somewhere. Now, maybe the meanderings of the river are not sufficiently or well abstracted in the plan of the museum, because the meanderings of a river are more organic and fluid, and this is very deterministic. But we'll see. This stair is rather nice, and we are going to see it in another building. Not this particular kind of stair, but a different one. Still, the glass refuses to recede in being unnoticeable, is very noticeable. Otherwise, the galleries are as they are, what can we say? Now, this Museum of Art in Tennessee, in Knox County, I like it. It has something almost, for some reason, I think of Fumihiko Maki in Japan, maybe a little bit, but no, Arata Isozaki is not so reticent. It is a building that is monumental. It has, if I am to express myself oxymoronically, a reticent monumentality. I know it is a paradox and an oxymoron, but to me, this is what I see here, a reticent monumentality. This probably, most surely, I hope, it was not done by him. But this building, I think, is an example of what Larrabee Jones was able to, Barnes was able to create. And I was referring to, you'll see another view of this stair, which is the only sculptural element in an otherwise rectangular, rectangular shape. So, this reticent architect was able to, as we saw in the plan of a building previously, he was able to create distortions or disjunctions, but just to create a little bit of a difference, nothing more. The same here, but is enough. It is enough. If this stair was not here, the building, this space would have been rather banal. But because of it, as he did it, it becomes both statically convincing and visually surprising. It's because of his ability to create an accident just enough to not get bored, both maybe himself and ourselves. Now, whatever was placed on the facade of the building, these eyes, these banners, this does not belong to him, but it kind of looks nice. And I'm even thinking that I'm fantasizing that somehow the building invited somehow this kind of display, bidimensional display. So it was intrinsically in the substance of the building an invitation to create this kind of display, the eyes of the building. Interesting. Why not? Here is something else, but still, I think the building has this. Modest monumentality or reticent monumentality, which I like. And it doesn't bother me at all that it is symmetrical. Although I know that modernism itself was reluctant to use symmetry most of the time. Not always, but most of the time. So I read again what he himself said. Barnes Museum designs, because we just looked at the design, the museum design seemed to reflect his modest personality. In Barnes' own words, we are trying to create architecture that does not compete with art, to put the priorities in the right order. It is flow more than function that concerns us. There must be a sense of going somewhere like a river. At the same time, the architecture must be relatively uneventful and anonymous. Not an easy thing to do an architecture which is relatively uneventful and anonymous. And now, happy birthday. And now we go to the next and last architect that I will talk about today, an interesting architect. And I will also show a very interesting discovery I made this morning about a school in the United States where the archive of Craig Ellwood is and where he also gave lectures. And so I begin now this short presentation on an interesting case, and I will try to explain why he was an interesting case. First of all, this was not his real name. He took this name from a liquor store that was across the street from an office which he opened together with his brother and I think with someone else. And the liquor store was called Ellwood. And they called themselves Craig Ellwood. I don't know where the Craig came from. And then later on, he took himself this name. What was also interesting, he was not a licensed architect. He had an office, but he had no right to signature. Other people signed for him. Apparently, he was an eccentric man. He had a red Ferrari, and he was entertaining the West Coast elite, the entertainment elite, and he built. And apparently the architectural community was against him. But from what I understood, his buildings still sell for a lot of money, and some buildings are not bad at all. He was very influenced by Mies van der Rohe, and you'll see it very clearly. So Craig Ellwood, born on April 22nd, was an influential Los Angeles-based modernist architect whose career spanned the early 1950s through the mid-70s. Although untrained as an architect, Ellwood fashioned a persona and career through equal parts of a talent for good design, self-promotion, and ambition. He was recognized professionally for the fusing of the formalism of Mies van der Rohe with the informal style of California modernism. Here was the man. His haircut makes me think a little bit of Paul Rudolph. and he was smoking. You are not going to see too many architects who smoke when so-called official pictures are taken of them, but he was. Here he is not smoking, but he is smiling. He's smiling like a man who has a red Ferrari, and who wouldn't smile having has such a car. The Hunt House, H.A. Hunt House. An interesting house. I don't know why it is called Hunt. Maybe the family that commissioned the building was named Hunt. It's an interesting building. It's abstract. It has a rift. There are these boxes. It's mid-century aesthetics, but I think it's good. And even this facade towards the street is engaging with its opaqueness. It's transparent. This is my day for oxymorons. It's transparent opaqueness. Sorry for maybe not everybody is inclined to accept easily such expressions like opaque transparency or vice versa, transparent opacity. It's not bad, Craig Ellwood. Some even think I read an article where that he was some kind of a charlatan, that he actually didn't design. He had people in his office, but I don't think it's true. I think he had an input there, and maybe it's not very measurable that input, but he signed these buildings. I mean, not in terms of technical, projects or drawings, but it was his firm. So he built a reputation based on works that his office was producing. An interesting building, actually. Dramatic scene from here. You are going to see a view from the top with a building near building near building. Not very, at a superficial reading, not very different, from each other, but still, he's looking more carefully. You realize that his modernism was fresh, and strangely, maybe it still is. Actually, the destiny of mid-century modernism is a good one for our time, and it has been for a number of years. Things built in the 50s and 60s and early 70s are still somehow inspirational. Maybe because it was a modernism which was, on one hand, not affected by historicism like in postmodernism. On the other hand, it didn't end up in banality. But in this case, it's even more surprising because I always thought that Miss van der Rohe was a dead-end street. But through Craig Ellwood, I would say that it's not quite so. This man worked maybe not so much in this building, but you'll see other buildings. You'd say this man almost plagiarized Mies, but no, it's still his architecture, and you are going to see what I'm talking about. Here it is a view of this Malibu Road, in California, and his building I think is here. Anyway, we are going to see it from here it is. So I guess they had all similar plots of land, and then each one built a house in a certain way. This one is by Craig Ellwood. Now, who said that life is not nice? I mean, certain people enjoyed life and still do, I imagine, in these houses facing the ocean. Here is a house by Craig Ellwood hitting the market in Los Angeles for $3 million. By the way of millions of dollars, actually, by the way of millions of dollars, I will mention millions of euros. Yesterday, I read that Adrian Ghenia, the Romanian painter, again sold at Sotheby's to paintings for, I don't know, 6 millions or something like this together. That is remarkable. This man is, strangely, everybody talks about how much money he makes with his paintings and less about the quality of his painting. But I think after Brâncuși, he is the most successful Romanian artist ever. Anyway, and he's young. But when you hear about such amounts of money being paid for paintings of a young artist, you are sorry for, if not for yourself, but or myself, but also for the many painters who barely survive. You know, there is an indecency in this escalation of prices in art as an investment. Somebody told me when I lived in the United States that in capitalism, art is either an investment or an accessory, when in fact the essence of art should be neither. The essence of art should have nothing to do with being an investment or being an accessory, something you hang on a wall, which without it would be unbearably boring. Anyway, look at the interior of this house, $3 million house by Craig Ellwood. It's not bad. Somehow, although I'm against large surfaces of glass, but there is luminousness here. I don't know, it's something that I like. I don't know exactly why. But, and he doesn't really invent a lot. He works within the aesthetics created and sustained by Mies, but he works vertically, which is, Mies didn't do in the case of his private residencies. This man does. And in fact, now that I think of it, I didn't see a building yet on a sloping piece of land in the case of Mies. He always worked on flat land. But Craig Ellwood assumes this, a natural environment which is not flat, and I'm glad he does. And it's interesting. It's good, this building. I think. What can I say? It's a fine building, and I almost feel like saying $3 million is not really a big price for this house. Maybe I'm changing. Maybe it's because of the cold, but I like this building. The Rosen House from 1961, so 60 years ago. A square, you would say it's a square, what's the big deal? But you'll see that some things are happening within that square. I don't know why the architectural community made fun of him. Now, of course, the flamboyance of the little car is there for all to see, and you see the relationship with Mies. But this is a different kind of Mies, if I can say so. It's yes, the influence is obvious, but still, this is not Mies. This is Craig Ellwood, the one who took the name from a liquor store and who had a red Ferrari. And it might be that the last picture I show in this short presentation on him is actually with his red Ferrari. I'm not knowledgeable about cars, but if someone of you is, maybe I will be happy to know that that car is indeed a Ferrari. You are going to see it. So I was wrong when I thought that Mies was a dead-end street. It seems that it is not the case. Here is an interpretation of Mies, not very removed from the original, and still interesting. I see now read something, okay, disappeared. Thank you. I don't know how that thing sometimes appears there. I have to learn this too. The level of abstraction is high. And he became later, in his later part of his life, Craig Ellwood retired, so to speak, to Italy with his new wife, the fourth wife, I think, and maybe also with a red Ferrari, and he began to paint. So this abstractionist in the field of architecture maybe found inspiration in the words of Michelangelo that I quoted yesterday or before yesterday when we talked about concept. Pittura è una cosa mentale. Although I think he was a better architect than painter. I saw a picture with one of his paintings and I regret, well, the most picturesque thing there was himself, the artist, the way he looked like, than the painting. But I like this building. I don't know. I'm probably changing or growing old. I like this building. It's large, yes, seen from above. Here you don't quite expect to be actually a square of appreciable dimensions. It almost looks like a museum or like some kind of an institution. Spectacular views, spectacular landscape. When I see this kind of roofing so clean, I wonder how do they do it like this? Because in Romania, for example, it's impossible to have a flat, a terrace, so clean and manicured and, unaffected by snow, rain, and nothing. It's incredible. The Temple of Steel, as it is called, the Daphne residence, Craig Ellwood designer again. I don't know why it is called the temple and I don't know why it is called of steel. Of course, there is a lot of steel here, but I wouldn't say that necessarily steel is the predominant material. Anyway, similar in a way to, and here you'll see something very peculiar and Mr. Neufert, Ernest Neufert would certainly protest, and so would the functionalists in general, because you will see do you see these steps here? There is no podium. I mean, imagine, how do you get in or how do you get out? There is a risk of falling. It's a very unusual way to do this, and but on the other hand, visually is kind of interesting, but functionally it is problematic. I imagine, even though he was not a trained architect, that he knew better, so to speak. Maybe this was his, I don't know, his provocation to bring in some uh, the invitations, subversive invitations of Friedrich Nietzsche, who said, "Live dangerously." Now look at this. you know, uh, uh, I never saw this in a building until now, but Craig Ellwood did it. Very interesting. I imagine this is used just to exit the building and then leave the so-called door open behind, the sliding door, and then you can step into the room and then close the sliding door. Not bad. I mean, even if I don't play the piano, I wouldn't mind at all to live here. Although when the bill comes for the electricity, I might reconsider. But otherwise, it's nice room. Now, I talked about the demagogy of glass, but in this case, I kind of, prefer to talk about something else. I guess here is open now, the door. So anyway, interesting. A big house, yes. It sits well there, though. I wonder what Miss might have thought of it. Miss was alive when this building was built. La joie de vivre. I'm sure they had great parties here. They had no pandemic. The red Ferrari was not far away, probably. Well, he didn't live in this house, but he probably was invited to the party. We saw the room, this room with the piano. The bridge house. Now we arrive at an interesting portion of this short presentation. This bridge house, he made the drawings, model, but it was not built by him, was built by some students in a college of architecture that I knew nothing about. And they built other buildings, very interesting buildings. And I allow myself to include also those other buildings, although they don't belong to Craig Ellwood. This was the building that he would have liked to build but didn't. And then the students of this College of Architecture, where he in fact lectured and where the archive of Craig Ellwood is, built it. And they had an interesting conception about how to, they probably also had interesting amounts of money, because to build this building, with a lot of steel and so on, it was not the least expensive enterprise. Plus, they built other buildings. But you'll see how interesting those buildings are. And it's like an experiment, kind of like similar to an extent to Amereida, to Ciudad Abierta in Chile that I showed recently. This is the so-called concept: a house as a bridge above a rift. And initially was built by the students with glass. Then for some reason the glass was removed and the railings were placed in. But the project initially was like this. So this particular concept existed since 1964 and was obviously envisioned for a dramatic site. Ellwood associate Gerald Horn worked on the design and drawing above, the one that you saw, at Ellwood's request. Again, Ellwood apparently was busy doing other things, getting married several times and running his beautiful red Ferrari. It wasn't realized until Cal Poly, California Polytechnic, I guess it means, students constructed it in 1967, 1968. Ellwood had a long relationship with the school, including lectures and teaching. Cal Poly also houses his archives, as I mentioned. So this was the plan of the house. And, there are a few other houses built like this in the world. A house above a rift, above a river or rivulet. This was how initially it was. And again, built by the students. And this is how it is now. They removed the glass for some reason, or it broke. And now it looks like it's an abandoned site somehow. But there are those railings that were placed there in order to avoid dramatic accidents of possible visitors. Graffiti is showing up slowly but surely. This was at an earlier time when there was still glass in some parts, at least, of the building. And now without the glass and the railings instead. Now this is another building which has nothing to do with Craig Ellwood, but I felt like showing them, particularly thinking about the students, that they might get inspired to think of a possible, I don't know, maybe we can do this, something similar, to find a place and a piece of land and begin to build something. These are public toilets, but in my opinion, they are more creative architecturally than what some star Japanese architects built recently, including Tadao Ando. Um, Not bad. I mean, who cares that it's a public toilet, but it's an interesting structure. And the graffitis do not hurt the structure at all. I think I would keep them as they are. The underground house from 1982 was actually underground at some point. Now it's above the ground. So from 1982, look at this. You know, we looked at the building by Doshi in India that our friend Vatsal Shah showed us. Well, this is not too different actually. It's smaller, but this was built by some students to learn a certain technique or technology. And this is not bad, I think. And again, you know, you have these surprises. You know, these are buildings that are not known from magazines or blogs or whatever, although I discovered it on a blog, discovered them on a blog. But this kind of creativity, I think, is enticing. Even with the graphic interventions that came afterwards, just before the buildings were abandoned. I'm talking about the graffitis. But in a way, you know, what Hussein, the artist in India, did in Ahmedabad with a cave that Doshi built is not very dissimilar in spirit, if not in form. A stick structure from 1976, which was renovated in 2009, a different kind of building, but this one also interesting in a different way. I knew nothing again about this campus. Shell House, 1963, 1964, and probably restored or so in 1975. Look at this roofing, you know. Eduardo Torroja was mentioned in the text about it, and I will read something about how it was built. These were students. So the exterior is the oldest structure still in the canyon. The roof was created by putting a center pole with cables hanging down, then shotcrete, I don't know what shotcrete is, was sprayed onto a wire mesh that was welded onto the cables. The pole was then removed. And here, this is what we get. And it's not bad, I think. Again, has nothing to do with Craig Ellwood, except that it is on the campus where his bridge house was built and where the archive of his archive is. Look at the interior. You know, it's why would such a building be abandoned? I don't know. It looks like it is abandoned. Well, I guess the United States qualifies as a civilized country. But then what do you make of Adolf Loos' claim that the more civilized the country, the less graffitis? Well, it doesn't truly seem to be the case. We have graffitis for all to see here. The greenhouse, 1983, 1989, a different kind of building, but maybe a little more conventional somehow. But still, it's architecture in a natural environment. The Geodesic Dome, they built it in 1957 after Buckminster Fuller gave a lecture at this college. Here it is a small one, but they built it. Not a little thing, even though its dimensions are not very big. After a speech by Buckminster Fuller at California Polytechnic in 1956, a group of 5 architectural engineering students came together to build his patented geodesic dome. This was the first permanent dome of its kind in the Western United States. Fratessa Tower, this is from 2004. I guess they continue. Maybe the the structures only appear to be abandoned, but maybe they are not. And Hay Bale Arch, 2004. Yeah, the tower maybe is not really a tower, and the arch is, I guess, an arch, but they are kind of solitary, and in this landscape, to me, they are not very impressive. So this is how it is called, Paulie Canyon. Uh, it's an interesting location and an interesting site. It's also referred to as the design village of or architecture graveyard. Uh, why the architecture graveyard? But I think an interesting experiment. And here is a map of this village. We are going to see at the end of the presentation another work, a large institutional work by Craig Ellwood. After we end this short trip through this architectural graveyard, even the map is interesting, graphically speaking. Here is the bridge house by Craig Ellwood that was built by the students. So an experimental practices laboratory, College of Architecture and Environmental Design, dedicated in 1963 by Dean George Haslane. This area is intended for full-scale experimentation. Nice. We seek to abolish the distance between theory, design, and construction. A noble attempt for the things we have to learn before we can do them. We learn by doing them. Nice. I would say very nice. Okay, and this is a website. If you want to, you can read more about this esoteric survey. It's a blog of this group at Paulie Canyon Architecture. And a view from the air, maybe not very relevant here now. And now we arrive at the last work that I show today by Craig Ellwood, the Art Center College of Design in Pasadena, California, from 1975. Quite a big work. And it has a lot in common with the bridge house that we just saw. Something that it wasn't actually him who designed it because he was busy running his red Ferrari. But I imagine that his presence was still important for the office. And look at this. It's a giant building. It's a giant building with a canyon going underneath and a natural rift. I think it's interesting. Is the abstraction of the work of man in conjunction with nature, in part disciplined itself, as we can see here and here, but then there are other parts that are meandering. It's an interesting college of art and design, and yes, he is considered the author, the official author of this building. So I guess it pays to have a red Ferrari and to have a flamboyant personality and to intermingle with people of influence and above everything that I already said, to do good work. And I think he did. I don't know the percentage of his actual participation in the design process, but I imagine it wasn't without any reason that these buildings are consider him to be the author. And this aspect of combining Miss van der Rohe with the informality of the western coast of the United States, of California, is interesting. And somehow it is, I feel mentioning it, it is connected with the very meaning of the name Miss van der Rohe, because the word Miss, which was the family name from his father's side, he used it as a first name, but is actually the family name of his father. Miss means lousy, and lousiness is connected with informality. And we don't see maybe explicitly too much lousiness here, but this meeting between Miss and being lousy, in a way you can translate the name Miss van der Rohe into lousy van der Rohe. Here we have Craig Ellwood doing an architecture that is obviously inspired by Miss, but he assumes levels of freedom and informality that maybe Miss would not have easily accepted. And this is the last image. Again, I don't know about cars. It might be that this is his car. If it is a Ferrari, then it is the car of Craig Ellwood, because I read he was very fond of his red or reddish red Ferrari. Thank you, and happy birthday to him too.